Hello, welcome to BIMCafe Dynamo for Dummies series. In this video, we are going to cover the basics of nodes, which include anatomy of a node and node status. Alright, so before we start, I would like to mention that we usually use Dynamo Primer as our main resource. So for today's video, we are going to cover chapter 3.1, which is dedicated for nodes. And in general, what is a node? It's basically, nodes are basically objects that you connect to form a visual program, which is Dynamo. And behind each node, there is some API and there is some functions that are performed to act in your script and to do something. So let's try to dig more into what a node consists of and try to understand it much better. So right here we have a diagram that represents a node, and in this diagram everything is numbered, and under each number we have some description down here that illustrates what each corresponds to. So if we start to go into Dynamo and explain this, we can move into Dynamo, and then let me just search for a node, and I am going to use point by coordinates for this example. And let's try to observe what this node consists of. The first thing that we see is the name of the node, which is in the dark gray area here. And Dynamo actually has a naming convention that is used, and of course it's not random, it's made in a way that makes sense, and to keep everything organized in the libraries. So on the left side, we have the library and this is where all the nodes come from. This is where everything is stored. Some are default, some are actually packaged nodes that you can always download. But for today's example, the naming convention in general is actually used by having the category and then a dot to separate it, and then the name of the node that we will use. So it's always like that, and everything is categorized in the libraries, so that's how things are being named. Now, the second thing that a node consists of is ports, and what ports are, to be specific, the inputs on the left and the outputs on the right. So what are the inputs and outputs? They are basically just ways to connect more than one node to each other and to form a script. So in order to connect things together, you have to click on the input, for example, and then you'll see a wire that comes out of it where you can connect it to the next ones. For our case, we can actually, I forgot what to say. We can't cut that, right?
We can cut.
We can? Okay. So I don't have to repeat everything?
No, you don't need to. We can cut it.
Okay, so yeah, I wanted to go into this part. Alright, so I will repeat from the ports. Alright. Okay. Do I say 3, 2, 1? So 3, 2, 1. So the second part is the ports, and this is where the inputs and outputs come into place. This is where everything gets connected. This is where you start to form scripts by forming wires. So you click on your output, for example, and then you get a wire. And the same thing happens for the inputs. Now, this may be a bit confusing for some people because you may not understand what an input is expecting and what an output is expecting, because while you script, you need to understand what makes sense to connect with. So one thing that is really useful is if you hover over your inputs, for example, you will see a tool tip that comes on the left side. And this actually gives you a hint on what kind of data that this node is expecting to be connected with, and also whether this input or output has a default value associated with it. So in our case, X is expecting a double, which means a number. So anything that I would connect here, for example, if I search for a number in my search tool, and I connect it to my X input, this will work because this is what this is what my input is expecting. The second thing that you would see in your tooltip is a default value, and whether this input has a default value associated with it, because some inputs actually don't have a default value, and default values actually differ. Sometimes it's 0, sometimes it's false, sometimes it's something else. It depends on the data type that this port or input is having. But in our case, it's using default value 0. And one thing about default values, what it means precisely is that even if I disconnect my number node here and I run my script, which is set to automatic, so it's already being run, it works, and I can see in my background that I have a point, so it's being run, it's performing the action. And this is because it has a default value. So if I don't connect anything to it, this node will assume that my inputs are 0, because that's the default value if I don't connect it to anything. So that's what a default value is doing, and we can actually deactivate that by right-clicking on our inputs and then unticking use default value. So this makes our node inactive, and this will stop anything from being performed, because our point is lost now, if you notice, and I have no inputs, I have nothing, no default values, so nothing is happening in my node. However, if I activate it again, notice if I run it, I would have to deactivate it. So right click, use default value, and then run. Why? Okay. Why isn't it not working? There's no point.
Put a string to it. Put a code block or just any number to give it anything new.
Still? But that's weird.
No, sometimes you just need to reset it by actually plugging something into it.
Do I repeat it?
Yeah.
So wait, if I do this, see, it should work.
Yeah, but that's because you've not run it. If you click it
It
out.
is automatic.
Oh, alright. I don't know.
I'm gonna repeat this, okay. That sucks. Alright, again, it should work this time. Okay. I will repeat from the notes, because then if we cut, I think it will be obvious, and then it will. Alright. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Alright, so now that we've moved into the Dynamo program, we can start to search for a node that we will use for today's example, and this is point by coordinates. And then I will just select the one that I want. And if we try to observe what is happening inside my node over here, the first thing that I would see is the name of my node. And nodes are actually named in a very specific way in Dynamo. There is a naming convention behind each node. And the way it happens is that the first thing is the category, and then there's a period that separates the second thing, and then it comes the name of our node. So it's category dot name of the node, and this forms the name, the final name of our node. And of course, you always have to be very specific when you search for a node, because you might not get what you are looking for if you don't write it exactly the same way as it is. So the second thing that we have is actually the main body, and the main body is this gray part over here, and within that main body we see the ports. And ports in Dynamo are the inputs on the left side and the outputs on the right side, so they form the ports. And these ports are actually the way that that forms the whole script, because you have to connect these together with other nodes, and then you end up with a big script or a small script, depends. So to understand more what these ports have and what do they expect when you connect nodes together, you can actually hover over any of them. So let's say for my example, I would hover over my X input. And then on the left side, I can see that a tooltip appears and it has some description on what kind of information does it expect me to connect with. So right now it's telling me that my data type is double and that it has a default value of 0. And what that means is that I can now understand that, okay, if I would like to connect anything to X, it has to be a number because double means a number. And even if I don't connect anything to X, it will always have some default value, which is 0. So this will actually work. And as you can see in the background, I have a point that is set on 0, 0, 0. So X is 0, Y is 0, and Z is 0. That's why it's creating a point, because all of my inputs have a default value of 0. So even if I don't connect anything to them, this node will still perform. And that's the whole idea behind default values. If you don't want your inputs to have any default values, you can always hover over them, right click, and then untick use default value. And then notice how my node becomes inactive and my point disappears. And that's because I deactivated that option. So that's the difference between having a default value and not a default value in your nodes. Now the next thing that we have is, or the last part that we have is the lacing. And the lacing is actually at the bottom of the node. And if we go back to Dynamo to have a look, if you notice, it's always by default set as auto. So you'll always read auto, no matter which node you select, it will always have auto in the background and at the end. So, and that is because that's how the default option is set to. However, sometimes we don't want it to be auto. We don't want Dynamo to choose this for us. We would like to implement something else. So if we want to get access to the lacing options, we right click on the node and then go to lacing, and then we have all the different types right here. And in brief, what lacing is, it's just how things are matched with the list inputs. We will get into that much more in depth in later videos, but that's just in general how and what does a node consist of. Okay, that's done. So now I can start with the states. So use default. All right, 3, 2, 1. So now that we know a little bit more about what nodes are and what do they consist of and all the things that come along with it, we have to try to understand that sometimes when we script, we will come along different colors and different visualizations of our nodes. And in order to create proper scripts, we need to know how to deal with each color or each state that a node may come across. So as I mentioned before, we are still in chapter 3.1, discussing the nodes and specifically the states of nodes. So right here we have a diagram that is numbered. We have 7 different states that a node can have, and under each of these numbers is a description of what it's doing. So let's try to go into Dynamo and discover these much better. The first 2 things that I would like to say is let's first clean our space and then add our nodes again, but they should be not active because they have a default value. Okay, cut. Again. This sucks. I want to add actually 2 nodes. This one. This one. Okay. 3, 2, 1. All right, so now that we understood more what a node is and what is consisted, okay, again, 3, 2, 1. All right, so now that we understood what does a node consist of, and we tried to understand what comes along with it, let's move on to the next part, which talks about the states of a node and what are the different visualizations that you might come across while scripting. So you might visualize different colors that a node can be. Oh, Alex, I don't know what's happening. I don't know.
It's fine.
I think it's when I look at the camera, I just get stressed.
Yeah. You don't have to look at the camera.
Okay. All right. Okay. 3, 2, 1. All right, so now that we discussed what a node consists of, we can try to move on to the next thing, which is the states. And what are the different colors and visualizations that a node may come across while you script. So right now, I'm still using Dynamo Primer, and it has some diagram that shows all the different states. We have 7 states. And with each of these states, we have some numbers and some description that explains them much more. So let's start to discover each of these inside of Dynamo. So if I go to Dynamo, try to notice how the visuals are changing and how these 2 nodes look like right now. I have 2 nodes, and both of my nodes are inactive, meaning that they are both in light gray. And this is because there is nothing connected to them. There is nothing associated with the inputs and outputs. So they are inactive. Even if I run my script, nothing's going to happen because they are in an inactive state. However, if I start to connect things together, notice, let's say, for example, if I connect this node to this node, notice how this node became dark gray at the top. And that's because now it became active. So that's a second state. So an inactive state is when it's light gray, and then an active state is when it starts to get connected to something, and then it becomes with a light gray color at the top. So if I disconnect it, it's inactive, and then if I connect it again, it's activated again. This is the first 2 states that you might come across. The third state is an error state, and this is actually not a very common state that you'll come across, but it depends on your workflows. Usually you get this state when you, for instance, download a script or use a script that someone has sent to you, and then when you open it, you might see some nodes turn red, and that's telling you that all your nodes that are in the libraries, that this node in particular, the red node, does not exist within your libraries. So let's say, for example, we have our default libraries, and then we have some package node libraries. So if that node is the red node, if that doesn't exist within those 2 libraries, that means that you need to download it. So that's why it becomes red. So whenever you come across that, make sure that you have all the correct packages downloaded, and then rerun Dynamo again, and then it should work properly like a normal node. The fourth state is actually quite cool because this can be really useful in many ways while you script, and it's when you freeze a node. So if we go back to Dynamo, let's try to form a script out of this. We have just 2 nodes right now. Let me just add 1 node here. So this all elements of categories node is expecting a category here. So if I try to search for categories here, and then I will get this node that has a drop-down list with all the categories that you get in Revit. So let's say, let's choose anything random, let's say walls, and then I connect this to my node. Notice how this was light gray and then it became dark gray because I have something connected to it, so it became active. So we have a small script right now, and what's happening before we run anything, we have a category, which is our walls, then we have all elements of categories, and then we have element.geometry. So when we gather all the walls, we want some geometry to be made out of it. So let's run and see what happens. And it takes a little bit of time because we have some geometry in our script. So I'm just going to zoom out to show you. So right now, we can see that let's try to see what we get. So we can see that we have 56 walls in our project, and then when we gather all these walls, we create geometry out of them. So the state that we want to talk about, which is freezing, is quite useful because let's say you have a script and you don't want everything to be run. In our case right now, everything is being run, everything is functioning properly. But let's say I want to run things one at a time, or if I have a huge script and I only want to run one part of it, I can actually freeze some nodes and make them stop from running and then let the rest run normally. So let's try to do that for our case right now. So if I disconnect this in order to run the script again, I will freeze my element.geometry this time so that we can see what happens, and then I will run it again. Notice that I don't get any geometry because if I try to pin this and see, I still get all my elements of my walls, I still have everything functioning, but when it reaches, when Dynamo reaches this part that is frozen, it just stops the running process. And that's because it's frozen. And the cool part about this actually is that if anything was connected into after this node, it will also be frozen. So if I try to just take any node randomly and just connect these two together, this will also freeze as well, because it's basically what's happening is that once Dynamo reaches this node, anything that comes after that will also be frozen, and then anything that comes before that will run, of course, normally. So that's what freezing means, and it's quite handy when you have scripts that you don't want to delete some parts of them, but you can just freeze those parts that you don't want to be run and then run the rest normally. So the next state would be the fifth one, which is selected. And what that means is that, let's just unfreeze this one. And let's try to select one node. Notice now this is a normal node, it looks like it should be. If I select it, I notice that there is a blue outline around it, and my wires as well become blue. And this happens when you select anything. It doesn't matter which node you select, you'll always get some blue outline around it, because that way it's actually quite useful because you can see what's connected to it. You can easily find it if it's lost somewhere. If your wires are intersecting with each other, you always select your node and try to find what is connected to it and what is not, and where it's located. So that's quite handy as well. Now the sixth part is the warning state, and you'll actually get this quite a lot while you script. And this happens basically when you connect a node to another node, but not in a manner that is correct. So meaning that, let's say, if I go back to Dynamo, right now this node expects an element. Let's try to connect a category into instead of an element in here and connect them together. And then let's try to run this. Notice how I get a warning, and I actually get this because Dynamo is expecting an element, but rather I gave it a category, and that's obviously wrong. But don't worry about getting warnings, it's absolutely normal. You can always just hover over your node over here, and then you get a tooltip as well, trying to give you a hint of what kind of warning are you getting and how can you deal with it, or what can you do about it. Now, sometimes it might not be that useful, the description, but always remember that you're not the only person that's scripting in Dynamo, and you're not you might have not been the first person to get the warning that you're getting. So a good tip is to just select everything and then just right click and then copy and then go to Google just normally and then paste everything and just search for your warning. And then you'll always get some websites that might write something about it, something useful. Like, for example, this is the forum, and someone has came across the same error, and then there will always be discussions about it, how to fix it, how to do something about it to make it run properly. So that's how you can deal with your warnings, and you can always post questions on the forum, so it's quite useful. And yes, you can always reach out for help if you come across warnings. So the last state is the seventh state, which is the preview state. And this is really useful if you use geometry, for example, or anything that has some content that shows in the background. So let's fix our script the way it was before and then run it so that we can address the last part. And then if I select my element geometry, this is the node that's doing something in the background. This is where, if I try to just click on the graph option where I can see the 3D view, this is where I get some geometry. This is where I get some action that is showing in my Dynamo workspace. So I can actually run a script without having to see anything in the background. And the way to do that is to right-click on the node that's doing something in your background, and then clicking on preview. It's always activated by default, so you can deactivate it. And notice how it changed from a light gray and dark gray color into a bluish color. And that's just to show you that it is working, everything is all right, it's not frozen, but there's some result that's coming out of it, so it's functioning, there's some action that's being done, but nothing will show in your background. And you might wonder why is that really useful. It's quite useful when, let's say, you have a really large script and it takes time to run. If you deactivate the preview option in the nodes that have something displaying in the background, you will have a much faster script, and you might sometimes you don't want to see anything in the background to disturb your script, so you can just deactivate all of the ones that give you some result in the background. So that's one tip on that. And now that we covered all the states, we are done with this part, so I can cut this here.
Then we just do the transition, and then you say stay tuned.
Yeah, exactly. Stay tuned for more BIMCafe content. No, I need to say that I covered
in this video.
In this video, I covered the basics of nodes, including anatomy. Okay, I know what to say.
Really?
Yeah. All right. So in this video, we covered. No, I should say to sum up. Wait, again. All right.
No, this is not the one.
It's okay. All right, so to sum up what we did in this tutorial, we covered the basics of a node and including the anatomy of a node and the states of a node. Stay tuned for more BIMCafe content, and see you next time.